Richard Grant sat alone in his large office on the top floor of a tall building in downtown Los Angeles. The office had glass walls that showed the whole city below. At 52 years old, Richard was one of the richest men in the city. He owned many buildings, hotels, and shopping centers. People called him a tycoon because he had so much money and power. Richard looked at the clock on his wall. It was almost time to pick up his son from school. Unlike other rich men, Richard did not send a driver to get his son. He always went himself. It was one of the few things he did that made him feel like a normal father. His phone rang. It was his assistant, Nora. "Mr. Grant, the lawyers are here for the Miller contract meeting," she said. Richard frowned. He had forgotten about this meeting. The Miller contract was worth millions of dollars, but right now all he could think about was his promise to his son. "Tell them to wait," Richard said. "I need to pick up my son. I'll be back in an hour." "But sir, they've been waiting all week for this." "Let them wait more," Richard said and hung up the phone. He grabbed his car keys and walked past Nora's desk. She looked worried, but Richard didn't care. The lawyers could wait. His son could not. Richard drove his black luxury car to Westside Special Education Center. It was a school for children with special needs. His son Peter was 12 years old and had cerebral palsy. The condition made it hard for Peter to control his muscles. He used a wheelchair most of the time, though he could walk short distances, with braces on his legs. Richard parked his car and walked into the school. The hallways were wide to fit wheelchairs. The walls had bright, happy pictures made by the students. Richard walked to Peter's classroom and looked through the door window. He saw Peter sitting with his teacher practicing writing. Peter was trying very hard to hold the pencil steady. His hand shook, but he kept trying. Richard felt the same mix of feelings he always did when he watched his son: love, pride, and a deep sadness. 5 years ago, Richard's wife, Linda, had left them. She said she couldn't handle having a child with special needs. "I didn't sign up for this," were her last words before she walked out the door. She now lived in Europe with a younger man and rarely called Peter. Richard had raised his son alone since then. The teacher noticed Richard at the door and waved him in. Peter looked up and his face lit up with a big smile. "Dad," Peter said. His voice was a bit unclear, another effect of his condition, but Richard always understood him. "Hey, buddy," Richard said, smiling back. "Ready to go?" Peter nodded and began to put his books in his backpack. It took him longer than it would take other kids, but Richard never rushed him. The teacher helped Peter into his wheelchair. "Peter did great in music class today," the teacher told Richard. "He has a real talent for rhythm." Richard nodded, but didn't say much. He wasn't good at small talk, especially about Peter's condition. He just wanted to get his son home where he would be safe and comfortable. As they left the school, Richard asked, "What do you want to do this afternoon?" Peter looked thoughtful. "Can we go somewhere different, not just home?" Richard usually took Peter straight home where they had everything set up for his needs. Their mansion had been changed to make it easy for Peter to move around. There were ramps, special bathrooms, and even an elevator. "Where would you like to go?" Richard asked, surprised by the request. "Maybe we could eat somewhere? I'm hungry." Richard thought about it. Going to restaurants was hard. People stared at Peter. Some places weren't easy for wheelchairs. And Peter sometimes had trouble eating neatly, which made Richard worry about what others would think. "Please, Dad?" Peter asked, seeing his father's hesitation. "I'm tired of always going home." Richard couldn't say no to those eyes. "Okay, but not one of the fancy places. Let's find somewhere quiet." They got into the car and Richard helped Peter into the passenger seat, folding the wheelchair and putting it in the back. As they drove, Richard avoided the busy areas of the city. He didn't want to go anywhere where business people might know him. He didn't want to deal with fake smiles and people pretending not to notice Peter's condition. After driving for a while, they found themselves in a simple neighborhood, far from the rich areas Richard usually visited. There was a small restaurant, called Sunshine Diner, with a sign that said "All Welcome" and a ramp next to the steps. "How about here?" Richard asked. Peter nodded eagerly. The diner looked warm and friendly from outside. There were few cars parked outside, which meant it wouldn't be too crowded. Richard helped Peter back into his wheelchair and they went inside. The diner was clean and simple, with booths along the walls and tables in the middle. Soft music played in the background. An older man at the counter smiled as they entered. "Sit anywhere you like," he said. Richard found a table where Peter's wheelchair would fit comfortably. He noticed there was enough space between tables for easy movement. Maybe this place was used to having customers with special needs. A young black woman approached their table. She wore a simple blue uniform with a name tag that said Alicia. She had a warm smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome to Sunshine Diner," she said. "My name is Alicia and I'll be your server today." Unlike most people who met them, Alicia looked directly at Peter when she spoke, not just at Richard. She handed them menus and said, "Take your time. Our kitchen makes everything fresh, so there's no rush." Richard was used to people treating him with extra attention because of his expensive clothes and commanding presence. But Alicia treated them both the same way she probably treated everyone, with simple kindness. "What looks good to you, Peter?" Richard asked. Peter studied the menu, taking his time. "Can I have a cheeseburger and chocolate shake?" he asked, his speech slower and less clear when he was excited. "Of course you can," Alicia said, looking right at Peter. Most people looked uncomfortable when Peter struggled with his words, but she waited patiently. "How would you like your burger cooked?" Peter looked at Richard, not used to being asked directly. "He likes it medium," Richard answered automatically. Alicia nodded, but gently asked Peter, "Is medium how you like it?" Peter thought for a moment and then shook his head. Medium well, please." Richard stared at his son in surprise. He had always ordered for Peter, thinking he knew what his son wanted. Maybe he had been wrong. Alicia wrote down the order and looked at Richard. "And for you, sir?" "The same," Richard said, still thinking about what had just happened. As Alicia walked away, Richard noticed how she stopped at another table where an old woman sat alone. Alicia touched the woman's shoulder gently and said something that made her smile. It wasn't the practiced customer service Richard was used to seeing. It was genuine care. The music in the diner changed to something with a stronger beat. Richard noticed Peter's fingers tapping along on the table. His son loved music and had a good sense of rhythm, despite his physical challenges. "You like this song?" Richard asked. Peter nodded, his whole face brightening. "I love it," Alicia returned. With their drinks, she noticed Peter tapping his fingers to the music as she set down his chocolate shake. "You've got rhythm," she said to Peter with a smile. "Do you like to dance?" Richard almost interrupted to explain that Peter couldn't dance, but he stopped. Himself, Peter was already answering. "I never tried," Peter said, looking sad. "My legs don't work well." Alicia put down her serving tray and held out her hand to Peter. "Would you like to lead me in a dance? You don't need perfect legs to feel the music." Richard wanted to object. He wanted to protect Peter from trying, something he might fail at from being embarrassed. But before he could say anything, he saw the look of pure joy on his son's face. "Can I, Dad?" Peter asked, his eyes filled with hope. And in that moment, Richard Grant, the powerful tycoon who controlled millions of dollars and hundreds of employees, felt completely powerless to deny his son this simple wish. Even though everything in him wanted to protect Peter from possible failure, he nodded. "If you want to," he said softly. Richard watched as Peter slowly moved his wheelchair back from the table. The boy's hands trembled with both excitement and the effort to control his movements. Alicia stood patiently, her hand still extended, her smile never wavering. "I'll help. You," Richard said, starting to stand up. "Maybe just this once, let him try on his own first," Alicia suggested gently. She wasn't being rude, but her words made Richard stop and sit back down. Peter pushed his wheelchair toward a small open area between tables. The few other customers in the diner looked up with mild curiosity. Richard felt his body tense, ready to step in if anyone stared too long or said something unkind. He had spent years protecting Peter from the cruelty of strangers. But something unexpected happened. The old man behind the counter, the owner, Richard guessed, nodded approvingly and turned the music up just a little. A middle-aged couple at a nearby table smiled warmly. No one stared with pity or discomfort. Alicia moved in front of Peter's wheelchair and took both his hands in hers. "Now you lead and I'll follow," she said. "Just move however feels right with the music." Peter looked nervous but determined. He began to move his right hand in time with the beat, pulling Alicia's hand gently with it. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, but Alicia followed as if they were dancing the most beautiful waltz. When Peter moved his wheelchair slightly to the right, she stepped that way. When his left hand rose shakily, she turned under it in a slow, graceful twirl. Richard couldn't take his eyes off them. He had always seen Peter's condition as something that limited him, something that needed to be managed and accommodated. But Alicia saw possibilities where Richard had only seen problems. Peter was smiling wider than Richard had seen in years. His body, usually so tense with the effort of controlling his movements, seemed to relax into the rhythm. He wasn't trying to move perfectly. He was just moving with the music, and Alicia made it all look like it was exactly what was supposed to happen. "She's good with him," a voice said. Richard turned to see the old man from the counter standing nearby, watching the dance with a gentle smile. "I'm Frank, by the way. I own this place," the man said. "Alicia's got a special way with people, especially kids." Richard nodded, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to casual conversations with strangers. In his world, every interaction had a purpose, usually involving money or power. "Your boy looks happy," Frank continued. "That's a good thing to see." Richard looked back at Peter, who was now attempting to lead Alicia in a small circle. His wheelchair moved in fits and starts, but Alicia never lost step, never showed frustration. She laughed when Peter did, her joy seeming as genuine as his. "He does look happy," Richard agreed quietly. When was the last time he had focused on making Peter happy instead of just keeping him safe and comfortable? He couldn't remember. The song ended, and another began. Peter looked at Alicia with questioning eyes, clearly wanting to continue. "One more?" she asked, and Peter nodded eagerly. This time, Peter seemed more confident. He tried bigger movements, and when his hand accidentally jerked to the side, he didn't get upset as he usually would. Instead, Alicia made it part of the dance following, the unexpected movement as if it were planned. A small girl, about 4 years old, who had been eating with her parents at another table, slipped down from her chair and toddled over to watch. Her parents looked alarmed and started to call her back, but Frank waved at them to let her be. The little girl stood near Peter's wheelchair, watching with wide eyes. Peter noticed her and hesitated, his insecurity returning. Richard was about to get up and intervene when Alicia smoothly included the child in their dance. "Would you like to join us?" she asked the little girl, who nodded shyly. Now Alicia was dancing with both Peter and the little girl, creating a small circle of movement that somehow worked, despite Peter's wheelchair and the child's clumsy steps. The girl's parents watched, with smiles clearly touched. Richard felt something strange in his chest, a tightness that wasn't unpleasant. It took him a moment to recognize it as pride, not the usual pride in his wealth or business success, but a pure, simple pride in his son. Peter was dancing, Peter was smiling. Peter was connecting with others in a way Richard had never thought possible. The second song ended, and Alicia gave a small curtsy to both Peter and the little girl. "Thank you for the dance," she said formally, as if they had been at a grand ball rather than a simple diner. The little girl giggled and ran back to her parents. Peter's face was flushed with joy and exertion. "That was amazing," Peter said, his speech clearer than usual in his excitement. "Did you see me, Dad? Did you see me dance?" "I saw you, buddy," Richard said, his voice rough with emotion. "You were great." Alicia helped Peter navigate his wheelchair back to their table. "Your burgers should be ready soon," she said. "Dancing works up an appetite." As she walked away, Peter couldn't stop talking about the dance. His words came out faster than usual, sometimes getting tangled, but Richard didn't try to calm him down as he normally would. Instead, he just listened, seeing his son in a new light. Their food arrived, brought by Alicia on a large tray. She set the plates down carefully. "Enjoy your meal," she said. "Let me know if you need anything else." As they ate, Richard noticed how Alicia moved around the diner. She knew all the regular customers by name. She helped an elderly man cut his food when his arthritic hands struggled with the knife. She made a young mother laugh when her baby spilled juice everywhere. Each small act of kindness seemed natural to her, not performed for tips or praise. "She's nice," Peter said between bites of his burger. "Yes, she is," Richard agreed. He was trying to understand why Alicia's behavior affected him so deeply. He had met plenty of nice people before. He had donated millions to charities that helped people like Peter. But there was something different about the way Alicia treated his son, with a respect that went beyond kindness, seeing Peter as a person first, not a condition to be managed. After they finished eating, Alicia brought their check. It was so small compared to the bills Richard usually paid at restaurants that he almost laughed. He took out his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the table. "Keep the change," he told Alicia when she returned. She looked at the bill with surprise. "This is too much," she said. "Our burgers aren't that special." "The food was good, but the dance was priceless," Richard said. It wasn't just about the money. He wanted to show his appreciation, and money was the language he knew best. Alicia seemed about to protest again, but then she looked at Peter's happy face and nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. "It was my pleasure. Really." As they prepared to leave, Peter looked up at Alicia. "Can I come back and dance again sometime?" "Anytime," she said with a warm smile. "The music's always playing here." Outside in the car, Richard helped Peter into the passenger seat. The boy was still talking, excitedly about the dance, about how Alicia had followed his lead even when his movements weren't perfect. "She didn't try to fix me," Peter said suddenly, his voice becoming serious. "She just danced with me the way I am." Richard felt those words like a punch to his gut. How many therapists, doctors, and specialists had he hired over the years to fix Peter? How much of his focus had been on Peter's condition rather than on Peter himself? As he drove back toward their large, empty mansion, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the simple joy he had witnessed in that small diner. For years, he had used his wealth to build walls around Peter, to create a protected space where his son wouldn't have to face the difficulties of the outside world. But in doing so, had he also cut Peter off from its simple pleasures? "Dad?" Peter's voice broke into his thoughts. "Can we go back to that diner tomorrow?" Richard looked at his son's hopeful face and made a decision. "Yes," he said. "We can go back tomorrow." But Richard knew he wanted to do more than just return to the diner. He wanted to understand what had happened there, how a simple dance had shown him a side of his son he had never seen before. And he wanted to learn more about Alicia, the waitress who had changed something in both of them with her quiet kindness and respect. The next morning, Richard sat at his large desk in his home office. He had called his assistant and told her he wouldn't be coming to the office today. This was unusual for him. Richard almost never took days off. "Is everything okay, Mr. Grant?" Nora had asked, concern in her voice. "Yes, everything is fine. I just need a day with my son," Richard had replied. Now he sat looking at his computer screen. He had pulled up the schedule for the day. Peter had physical therapy at 10, then a tutor coming at 1. Richard had arranged Peter's life to be full of specialists and tutors, all coming to their home so Peter wouldn't have to deal with the outside world more than necessary. Richard picked up his phone and canceled all of Peter's appointments for the day. Then he walked to Peter's room. The boy was already awake, sitting in his special bed that could raise and lower to help him get in and out more easily. "Good morning," Richard said. "I was thinking we could go back to that diner for breakfast. Would you like that?" Peter's face lit up. "Really? What about my therapy with Dr. Moore?" "I canceled it," Richard said. "Today is just for us to do whatever you want." Peter looked surprised but happy. "Can we go now?" They got ready quickly. Richard helped Peter dress and get into his wheelchair. Soon they were driving back to Sunshine Diner. Richard noticed how Peter kept looking out the window, taking in everything they passed. Had his son always been this interested in the world outside their home? When they arrived at the diner, it was busier than the day before. The morning crowd filled most of the tables. Richard helped Peter navigate through the door, and they looked for a place to sit. Frank, the owner, spotted them and waved them over. "Good to see you folks again so soon," he said with a friendly smile. "Let me clear a good table for you." He quickly wiped down a table near the window and moved a chair to make room for Peter's wheelchair. "Alicia will be with you in a bit. She's busy with the morning rush." Richard and Peter sat down, and Richard handed Peter a menu. He noticed how Peter studied it carefully, making his own choices. A small thing, but Richard realized he rarely gave Peter the chance to make even simple decisions like what to eat. A few minutes later, Alicia appeared at their table. She looked tired but smiled warmly when she saw Peter. "Well, hello again," she said. "Nice to see you back so soon." "We came for breakfast," Peter said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Good choice. Our pancakes are the best in town," Alicia said. She took out her notepad. "What can I get for you today?" Peter ordered pancakes with extra syrup. Richard asked for eggs and toast. As Alicia walked away, Richard noticed how busy she was, moving quickly between tables, carrying heavy trays of food, yet still taking time to smile and chat with each customer. "She works very hard," Richard commented. "Yeah," Peter agreed, "but she seems happy." Their food arrived, and they ate while watching the busy diner. The place had a warm, friendly feeling that Richard's usual expensive restaurants lacked. Here, people talked to each other across tables. A group of older men at the counter laughed together over some joke. A woman with a baby got help from strangers when she needed to grab something she dropped. After they finished eating, Richard noticed Alicia taking a break. She sat at a small table in the corner, quickly eating a piece of toast while looking at what seemed to be a textbook. "I'll be right back," Richard told Peter. He walked over to Alicia's table. She looked up, surprised. "Sorry to interrupt your break," Richard said. "I just wanted to thank you again for yesterday. What you did meant a lot to Peter." Alicia smiled. "No need to thank me. Your son is a sweet kid. I enjoyed dancing with him." Richard glanced at the book she was reading. It was a nursing textbook. "You're studying to be a nurse?" he asked. Alicia nodded. "Yes, I'm in my second year of nursing school. I work here mornings and evenings to pay for it." She laughed a little. "It doesn't leave much time for sleep, but it'll be worth it when I finish." "That's impressive," Richard said, meaning it. He had never had to work his way through school. His family had been wealthy and everything had been provided for him. Alicia shrugged. "Lots of people do it. I'm lucky to have this job. Frank is flexible with my schedule because of classes." Richard wanted to ask more questions, but he could see she needed to get back to work. "Well, thanks again," he said, and returned to Peter. "What did you talk about?" Peter asked curiously. "I just thanked her for being nice to you," Richard said, "and I learned she's going to school to become a nurse." "That's cool," Peter said. "She'd be a good nurse. She's really nice." Richard paid their bill, again leaving a large tip. As they were about to leave, Frank came over to chat. "You folks should come by on Saturday night," he said. "We have live music. Nothing fancy, just a local band, but people sometimes dance." He winked at Peter. "Your dance partner will be here too." Peter looked at Richard with hope in his eyes. "Can we, Dad? Please?" Richard usually spent Saturday nights at home or at business dinners. The idea of coming to a small diner with live music and regular people was far outside his comfort zone. But looking at Peter's eager face, he couldn't say no. "Sure, we can come," he said. On the drive home, Peter couldn't stop talking about going back on Saturday. Richard listened, thinking about how different Peter seemed today, more alive, more engaged with the world, all because of a simple dance with a kind waitress. When they got home, Richard received a call from his office. There was a problem with a big project that needed his attention. Usually he would have rushed to the office, leaving Peter with one of his caregivers. But today, he told them he would handle it from home. Richard set up his laptop at the kitchen table instead of going to his office. This way he could watch Peter, who was in the living room listening to music. To Richard's surprise, Peter was trying to move his wheelchair in time with the music, practicing the same movements he had done with Alicia. While working, Richard found himself distracted. He kept thinking about Alicia, working hard at the diner, while studying to be a nurse. He opened a new browser window and searched for information about the nursing program at the local college. He learned it was a tough 3-year program, and many students struggled to complete it while working full-time. Later, that afternoon, Richard made some calls to his office and canceled his business dinner for that evening. Instead, he ordered pizza, and he and Peter ate in the living room while watching a movie. It was something they rarely did. Usually they ate at the dining table with Peter's caregiver, making sure he didn't make a mess. "This is fun, Dad," Peter said, smiling even though there was pizza sauce on his chin. Richard handed him a napkin but didn't fuss about the mess. "Yes, it is," Richard agreed. He realized how little fun they had together. Most of their time was spent on Peter's therapy, education, or Richard's work. When was the last time they just enjoyed each other's company? That night, after putting Peter to bed, Richard sat in his study thinking. He had built his life around making money and protecting his son. But what had he missed in the process? The simple joy he had seen on Peter's face when dancing with Alicia, when eating pizza and watching a movie. These were things money couldn't buy. Richard picked up his phone and made a call to his most trusted employee, John. "I need you to find out some information for me," Richard said. "About a woman named Alicia who works at Sunshine Diner on Maple Street. She's studying to be a nurse. I want to know more about her situation." "Are you looking for something specific?" John asked, used to Richard's sometimes unusual requests. "I want to know if she has family, where she lives, if she has any financial difficulties. But do it quietly. Don't talk to her directly, or let her know someone is asking about her." "I understand," John said. "I'll be discreet." After hanging up, Richard felt a little strange about his request. He wasn't sure why he wanted this information. All he knew was that this woman had shown his son a kindness that had changed something in both of them, and he wanted to understand more about her. 2 days later, Richard sat in his office looking at a file on his desk. John had been quick and thorough in getting information about Alicia Brown. The file contained basic facts about her life that painted a picture Richard hadn't expected. Alicia was 29 years old. She lived in a small apartment in a modest part of town. She was a single mother with a 7-year-old daughter named Zoe. The little girl had mild autism and went to a special program at a public school. Alicia worked 2 jobs, mornings and some evenings at Sunshine Diner, and weekend shifts at a local nursing home. She was in her 2nd year of nursing school, maintaining good grades despite her busy schedule. Richard felt a mix of admiration and guilt as he read the file. Admiration for how hard Alicia worked to make a better life for herself and her daughter. Guilt because he had asked John to gather this private information without her knowledge. The phone on his desk rang. It was Nora, his assistant. "Mr. Grant, your 3 o'clock appointment is here," she said. Richard put the file away in his drawer. "Send them in," he said. The meeting was about a new building project, a luxury apartment complex that would make Richard even richer. But throughout the discussion, he found himself distracted. He kept thinking about Alicia working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school while raising a child with special needs. Meanwhile, he was planning to build apartments most people could never afford. After the meeting, Richard called Peter's physical therapist. "Dr. Moore," Richard said when the man answered. "I have a question about my son." "Is everything all right with Peter?" Dr. Moore asked. "Yes, but I've been thinking about his therapy. We've been focused on helping him walk better, control his movements more. That's still important, but I'm wondering if there are activities that might help him express himself more. Something with music, perhaps." There was a pause. Then Dr. Moore said, "Actually, there are several therapeutic approaches that use music and movement. They focus less on correcting and more on expression and joy of movement. I've suggested them before, but you seemed more interested in traditional physical therapy." Richard felt a twinge of regret. Had he been so focused on fixing Peter's condition that he'd ignored other approaches that might have made his son happier? "I'd like to try them now," Richard said. "Can you recommend someone?" "There's a wonderful program at the community center. It's called Moving to Music. It's for kids and adults with various physical challenges. They meet twice a week." "That sounds perfect," Richard said. "But it's a group program? Not private sessions?" "Yes, it's a group," Dr. Moore confirmed. "That's part of what makes it effective. The social interaction, the sense of community." Richard had always arranged private sessions for Peter, believing they would be more effective and would shield his son from uncomfortable social situations. But now he remembered how happy Peter had looked dancing with Alicia, and later with the little girl who had joined them. "Let's sign him up," Richard decided. That evening, Richard told Peter about the new program. Peter was excited about trying something new, especially something with music. "It's like dancing with Alicia," Peter said happily. "Yes, but this will be with other kids like you," Richard explained. Peter's smile faded a little. "Will they be nice?" Richard felt a pang in his heart. Had he taught his son to fear other children by keeping him so isolated? "I'm sure they will be," Richard said. "And if anyone isn't nice, we don't have to go back, but I think it might be fun to make some new friends." Peter nodded slowly, still looking uncertain. Saturday arrived, and it was time for their visit to Sunshine Diner for the live music night. Peter had been looking forward to it all week. He even asked to wear a nice shirt instead of his usual t-shirt. When they arrived at the diner, it was busier than they had ever seen it. All the tables were full, and a small area had been cleared for a band that was setting up. Frank greeted them at the door. "I saved you a good spot," he said, leading them to a table near the small dance area, but with enough room for Peter's wheelchair. Richard looked around the crowded diner. There were people of all ages, from small children to elderly couples. Everyone seemed to know each other, laughing and talking across tables. He felt out of place in his expensive clothes, but no one seemed to notice or care. Alicia appeared, at their table wearing the same blue uniform but with her hair down instead of in her usual ponytail. She looked tired but smiled warmly when she saw Peter. "You made it," she said. "I'm so glad. The band is really good." "Will you dance with me again?" Peter asked hopefully. "Of course," Alicia promised. "As soon as my shift ends in about an hour. Until then I have to serve tables." As she walked away, Richard noticed a young girl sitting alone at a table in the corner, drawing in a notebook. She looked to be about 7 years old with curly hair like Alicia's. Richard guessed this must be Zoe, Alicia's daughter. The girl seemed focused on her drawing, not talking to anyone around her. Richard remembered from the file that she had mild autism. He watched as Alicia stopped by her table between serving customers, checking on her and giving her a quick hug. The band started playing, a mix of country and folk music that had people tapping their feet. Some couples got up to dance in the small space in front of the band. Peter watched them with bright eyes, his fingers tapping on his wheelchair armrest in time with the music. Richard saw Frank bring a glass of juice to Zoe, saying something that made her smile briefly before returning to her drawing. There was something special about this place, where a child could sit safely while her mother worked, where everyone seemed to look out for each other. After a while, Alicia came back to their table. "My shift just ended," she told Peter. "Ready for that dance?" Peter nodded eagerly. Richard watched as Alicia helped Peter move his wheelchair to the dance area. The band was playing a slower song now, perfect for their dance. Just like before, Alicia let Peter lead, following his movements with grace. Other dancers moved around them carefully, some smiling at the pair. Richard felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Frank. "Your boy seems happy," the older man said. "Yes, he does," Richard agreed. "Alicia has that effect on people," Frank said. "She's had a tough life, but she never lets it make her hard. Her girl over there," he nodded toward Zoe, "is a lot like your son in some ways. Different challenges, but they both see the world differently than most folks. Maybe that's why Alicia understood your boy right away." Richard looked at Zoe. still focused on her drawing, then back at Peter and Alicia dancing. "She's an amazing person," he said quietly. Frank nodded. "She sure is. Working herself to the bone to get through nursing school, raising Zoe all alone. I try to help where I can, being flexible with her hours, letting Zoe stay here during shifts. But it's not easy for them." The song ended and another began. Peter and Alicia continued dancing. Richard could see his son laughing, trying new movements with growing confidence. An idea began to form in Richard's mind. He was a wealthy man, used to solving problems with money. He could easily pay for Alicia's nursing school, help her find a better place to live. But something told him she wouldn't accept direct help from a stranger. Richard turned to Frank. "Does this place ever host events? Private parties, that sort of thing?" Frank looked surprised by the question. "Sometimes. Nothing fancy, but we've had birthday parties, small wedding receptions. Why do you ask?" "I'm thinking about hosting an event," Richard said. "Something for families with children who have special needs. A party with music, dancing, good food, somewhere they can have fun without worrying about stares or judgment." Frank's eyebrows rose. "That's a mighty fine idea. But why here? You could rent a fancy place, hire professional entertainers." Richard watched Peter spin his wheelchair in a small circle while Alicia twirled beside him. "Because this place is special. It's real. And I'd want Alicia to help organize it if she'd be willing. I'd pay her well for her time, of course." Frank studied Richard's face. "You know, when you first walked in here with your fancy watch and designer shoes, I figured you for just another rich guy who wouldn't give us a second thought. Looks like I might have been wrong." Richard smiled slightly. "I was that guy. Maybe I still am in many ways. But my son is showing me there's more to life than making money and closing deals." The music stopped, and the band announced they were taking a break. Peter wheeled back to the table, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad, did you see? I did a spin all by myself," he said proudly. "I saw," Richard said, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "You were amazing." Alicia followed, slightly out of breath from dancing. "Your son is a natural," she said. "He's got rhythm." Richard took a deep breath. "Alicia, I have a business proposition for you if you have a moment to discuss it." 1 month later, Richard stood at the edge of the large room watching the scene before him with amazement. The community center was filled with children and adults of all abilities. Some used wheelchairs like Peter, others walked with canes or braces. Some had Down syndrome or autism, and many had no visible disabilities at all. They were all moving to music, dancing together, laughing. This was the third weekly meeting of Dancing Without Limits, the program Richard had created after that night at Sunshine Diner. Alicia had agreed to his business proposition. He would fund a dance program for people with disabilities, and she would help run it, using her experience and natural talent for making everyone feel included. At first, Alicia had been suspicious of his offer. "Why would you want to do this?" she had asked. Richard had thought carefully before answering. "Because I saw how happy my son was when you danced with him. I want other children, and adults too, to have that same joy." She had studied his face, looking for hidden motives. "And you're willing to pay for all of this? The space rental, the music, my time?" "I have more money than I know what to do with," Richard had admitted. "This seems like a good use for some of it." In the end, she had agreed, but with conditions. She would only work on the program during hours she wasn't in school or at her other jobs, and she insisted that the program be affordable for all families, not just those with money. Now, watching the room full of happy faces, Richard knew it was one of the best decisions he had ever made. Peter was in the middle of the dance floor, moving his wheelchair in time with the music. Next to him was Zoe, Alicia's daughter. Over the past month, the two children had become friends. Zoe's autism made it hard for her to connect with other kids sometimes, but she and Peter understood each other in a special way. Alicia moved through the room, helping here and there, showing a new participant how to follow the beat, encouraging a shy child to join in. She had a gift for making everyone feel welcome and capable. Richard felt someone come stand beside him. It was Dr. Moore, Peter's physical therapist, who had started volunteering his time to the program. "This is remarkable," Dr. Moore said, watching the dancers. "I've been working with some of these kids for years, and I've never seen them so engaged, so happy." Richard nodded. "It's all Alicia. She has a way of seeing past limitations to the person inside." "And it was your vision to create this program," Dr. Moore reminded him. "Peter has made incredible progress, by the way. Not just physically, but emotionally. He's more confident, more willing to try new things." "I know," Richard said. "He's like a different child. Or maybe this is who he always was, and I just couldn't see it before." Across the room, Frank from the diner was setting up refreshments. He had become a regular volunteer too, bringing snacks from the diner and his easy way of talking to anyone and everyone. The music changed to a slower song, and Alicia walked over to where Richard stood. "Why aren't you dancing?" she asked with a smile. "Everyone dances here, remember? That's the rule." Richard shook his head. "I don't dance." "Neither did Peter until a month ago," she reminded him gently. Before Richard could protest further, Peter wheeled over to them. "Dad, come dance with us," he called. Richard looked at his son's happy face and couldn't say no. He let Peter lead, him onto the dance floor feeling awkward and stiff. But no one seemed to care or judge. A boy with Down syndrome showed Richard a move to try. A girl using a walker laughed with him when they both got the steps wrong. By the end of the song, Richard was smiling despite himself. He couldn't remember the last time he had danced or played or just been silly. Probably not since he was a child himself. After the dancing ended, the group gathered for snacks and drinks. Richard watched as Peter chatted with other kids his age, something that rarely happened before. For years, Richard had kept Peter isolated, thinking he was protecting him. Now he realized his son had been lonely. As people began to leave, Richard helped Alicia and the other volunteers clean up. This had become his new Saturday routine, so different from the business dinners and social events that used to fill his calendar. "You didn't have to stay and help," Alicia said as they folded chairs together. "I'm sure you have more important things to do." "Nothing more important than this," Richard said truthfully. Alicia gave him a curious look. "You've changed since that first day at the diner." Richard thought about it. "Yes, I suppose I have. Or maybe I'm just remembering who I used to be before. I got so caught up in making money and building walls around my son." They finished cleaning and Richard offered to drive Alicia and Zoe home. Their apartment was in a rundown building with narrow hallways that made it hard for Peter's wheelchair. Richard had been working on a plan to help with that, but he needed to be careful. Alicia was proud and independent. She wouldn't accept charity. As they drove, Zoe fell asleep in the back seat next to Peter, who was looking out the window contentedly. "Alicia," Richard said quietly, "I've been thinking about the future of our program." "Our program?" she repeated, sounding surprised at his choice of words. "Yes, ours. Your expertise and my funding. It's a good partnership." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to expand it, make it more than just a Saturday activity. Create a real center where people of all abilities can come for arts, music, dance, whatever helps them express themselves." Alicia looked at him with wide eyes. "That would cost a fortune." "I have a fortune," Richard said simply. "What I don't have is the knowledge of how to make it work. But you do." "Me? I'm just a nursing student. A waitress." Richard shook his head. "You're much more than that. You have a gift for seeing people as they are, not as labels or conditions. I'd like to offer you a job, a real salary to help develop and run this center. You could quit the diner and the nursing home, have more time for school and for Zoe." Alicia was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you doing all this?" she finally asked. Richard glanced in the rearview mirror at Peter, who was now dozing beside Zoe. "Because you taught me something important. For years I've been trying to fix my son to make him fit into the world, but you showed me that the world can change to include him just as he is. That's worth more than all my buildings and businesses." Alicia smiled softly. You're not the cold businessman you pretend to be, Richard Grant. Don't tell anyone, he joked. It would ruin my reputation. She laughed, then grew serious again. I'll think about your offer. It's a big change. Of course, Richard said. Take all the time you need. As they pulled up to her apartment building, Richard had another thought. There's a property I own not far from here. It has some ground floor apartments that are fully accessible. They're being renovated right now, but they'll be ready next month. The building has a community room too, which might be perfect for small group activities. Alicia gave him a knowing look. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Richard tried to look innocent. Just mentioning it as your business partner. A slow smile spread across her face. I'll think about that too. 1 year later, Richard stood in the doorway of a large, bright room. It was the grand opening of the Leading Step Center for Expressive Arts, named in honor of that first dance when Alicia had let Peter lead. The center occupied the ground floor of a building Richard owned, which he had completely renovated to be fully accessible. Upstairs, Alicia and Zoe lived in one of the accessible apartments, which made it easy for Alicia to manage the center, while finishing her nursing degree. Other apartments housed families with members who had various disabilities, creating a supportive community. The center had programs in dance, music, art, and theater. It welcomed people of all ages and abilities. Some came for therapy, others for fun. But all were treated with the same respect and dignity that Alicia had shown Peter that first day. Peter himself had blossomed. He had friends now, both with and without disabilities. He still used his wheelchair most of the time, but he was stronger and more confident. And he loved helping with the younger kids who came to the center, showing them that their disabilities didn't define them. Richard had changed too. He still ran his business, but with a new focus on accessible buildings and inclusive workplaces. He had hired several people with disabilities in his company, finding they brought valuable perspectives he had never considered before. As Richard watched Alicia lead a group of children in a dance, with Peter and Zoe helping the younger ones, he felt a peace he had never known before. His life had changed completely from that day in the diner, all because a kind waitress had seen his son not as a disability, but as a boy who wanted to dance, and she had let him lead.